music was oozing from the family home when I was a kid. A lot of those influences just all sort of converged in the lounge room. With the guitar, I had classical training and jazz training. If you played the piano, you were teased.
Oh, really?
Stick with what you're good at.
The way you're talking as music is your therapy.
You know, when you were a kid, you don't really explore your emotions. And I thought, my goodness, this man's seen horrible things, you know. And he used to buy me a drink, whatever I wanted, and he'd tip me hundreds of pounds to sing a song.
You don't know who you're influencing, who you're affecting.
Yeah, it means something. It means something to people. Because I've been in despair, was the unrealistic expectations that I placed upon myself. Cocaine was basically currency in the recording studios, and from that point on, things started improving.
Hello everyone, my name's Graham Strang, and I hope my younger self is listening. Tonight we are going a little bit different. We're going into the creative space. I'd like to introduce Simon York, musician, storyteller, creative leader, and someone who I've actually met for the first time today. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
No worries at all. Do you want to get right into it?
Yeah, sure. Bear with me. I had a gig on the weekend where I was singing in aircon, so I'm a bit croaky.
I'm croaky all the time, so you're fine.
That's all right.
I can't sing a note, so you're pretty safe. So we're going to get to know you.
Yeah.
And one of my notes here is personal background and early influences, and all I see is Byron Bay and booze and the ooze. Hit us with it.
Yeah, music was the booze that created the ooze, I suppose. The drug that was the bug. I grew up near Byron Bay, which is a very, obviously people know of Byron internationally because of the blues festival. My mother was a classical pianist, and my dad was a jazz saxophonist. So I suppose that comment came from the fact that sort of music was oozing from the family home when I was a kid. And my older brother played flute, and he listened to Latin jazz. And my sister played guitar and listened to country. And so a lot of those influences just all sort of converged in the lounge room, My dad taught me sax and taught me about jazz. And so to this day, my musical tastes and experiences and performances are very diverse, so I was very much influenced by music. Growing up, of course, by the sea, you grow up as a little bit of a nature boy, surfing and a small town. So I grew up in that privilege. I think it is a privilege, like compared to other parts of the world. We thought we were poor when we were kids. Because we didn't have swimming pools and fancy cars, but we were rich.
So you were into music from the absolute get-go?
Pretty much. Yeah, pretty much.
So what was the first instrument you learned?
I think piano.
Piano?
My mother used to put a pillow on top of the piano, and I would lie on the pillow with my head on the pillow and listen to her play and go to sleep. So,
that's amazing.
That sort of stuff messes you up. In a really good way, because you associate beautiful things, memories and fun times and laughter. My dad was such a character, played the sax, and he was always fun. So music was associated with fun and family.
So stalking a bit of your social media, because just learning a little bit about you, the guitar seems to be where you've landed. Is that the main instrument you play? Is that what
it's sort of like if I was asked to give up an instrument, it would be like saying which arm would I chop off?
Yeah.
Probably the piano is probably the guitar is my right hand.
Yep.
I don't know whether I'm a better pianist or a better guitarist, and I'm probably not the right person to make that assessment. No. Because I love both instruments so much. I love playing the piano, and I love playing guitar. With the guitar, I had classical training and jazz training. So, and same with the piano. So, it's hard to say.
You've talked about jazz. You've talked classical. I mean, a lot of the music that you've posted is very jazz orientated. Is that where you land your music now, or?
Yeah, I think so. Jazz, gives you the opportunity for improvisation. It's a very spontaneous style of music, what we call straight ahead jazz. because jazz was a very broad term, and it allows for. But then that opportunity also exists in blues as well. I have a blues band. We just recently played down near the Byron Bay area, and the blues solo is an example of that. I suppose jazz is a little bit more complex than blues. So, does that confuse you?
Not really. Like I grew up with my grandfather, a big organ player.
Right.
And my dad self-taught himself to play the guitar when he was young, and he went away from it when he was older, unfortunately. Right. I kind of wish he still played, but many times. I attempted the trumpet at school and was awful, absolutely. Then I attempted bagpipes, awful again.
Wow.
And then I went and played cricket and rugby and discovered I was good at that. For some reason, music escaped me, except my brother and my sister are both bagpipers, very good. My brother is one of those people who can just listen to music and play it back to you. I can't. I just enjoy music.
Reminds me of a funny story. I was talking about how my parents made music fun. My dad and my grandfather were all characters. And my grandfather once said, hey, do you guys want to hear me play the bagpipes? And I hope there's no animal lovers that are going to get upset with me. But he picked up the cat, and he held the cat's head under his tail, under his arm, and he bit the tail. And of course, the cat yelled out a great screech.
In a time gone by.
Yeah. So the fun of that and the humour of that.
And that's where your storytelling comes into it, I suppose. You've got those influences.
Yeah, Dad was a storyteller, always telling jokes, always laughing, and that's what I loved about him. One of the things.
Did you feel like you had much in the way of challenges when you were trying to come through and building your, obviously going from a child at home, going through wonderful music, then obviously I'm assuming at school you were heavy into it as well. Did you have much in the way of setbacks or challenges around schooling and the music side of things?
At high school, I actually went away from music because in my day and in where I was, if you played the piano, you were teased.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was kind of a little bit of what the word then was sissy. You're a bit of a sissy. So when I went to piano lessons, I would get off the bus and I would hitchhike to my piano lesson because I didn't want the other school students seeing me and figuring out where I was going.
Isn't it hard? Isn't it interesting dealing with the mental side of it, going, okay, I really want to do this, but I don't want to cop the I suppose the toxicity of it, but I still really want to do it. And you find a way to try and avoid both. Yeah.
Well, look, you're talking about the hard way.
Yeah.
Something I realised about myself when I renovated a house a few years ago is that my dad was really great with his hands. He was a carpenter. He could build anything with a Q-tip, He was just inventive and amazing. You just see a pile of timber and the next thing you know, you've got something built, and I never had that ability, really. I mean, I'm okay, but it was a realization I came to a few years ago is that you're probably going to ask me if at a future time if I had any advice, and that would be stick with what you're good at.
Yeah.
If you're not good at mowing the lawn, it doesn't mean that you're less a man or whatever. Pay someone else to do it and get on with what you're good at. And I think when I was young, I wish I'd known that about myself. Be what you are, do what you do.
It's mine's very similar. It's if you're good at something, stick to it. You do one thing and be great at it, rather than trying to do 5 things and be okay.
And I tried to be a mechanic and a builder and all those things, and I punished myself because I found myself failing in those areas. I could do it, but it would take 10 times longer than someone who was gifted in that.
So what made you realise that, hang on, I'm good at this, but I'm not so good at all that? And you put that over because it's affecting you.
Late teens.
Late teens?
Late teens, I realised, music's it. I can do other things, but if I'm going to do other things, I have to give up music.
Yep.
Because music will tear me away from the discipline required to do other things. So and it's been my ethos all of my life. You know, people used to say to me when I was young, "Oh, why don't you just play music on the weekend?" And I know musicians that do that, and all respect to them, but it's not me. It's all or nothing for me.
So, you know, we had a joke before about therapy, but that the way you're talking is music is your therapy. That's what helps you get away and clear your mind. And
there's something very cathartic about music, that's for sure.
You've got a little note in here about the therapy and humor in blues music, and you've got a note in here to ask you about B.B. King.
Well, I saw B.B. King when I was 13, and I had recently, we used to go down and shoot pool at a little milk bar in Lennox Head, and we used to put 20 cents in the jukebox and you'd get 3 plays. And I played a song, one that was St. James Cathedral, and this croaky old voice came on, and the lyrics said, I went down to St. James Cathedral and I saw my baby there. She was stretched out on a long, dark table, so cold, so alone, she was dead. And I remember as a young kid thinking, my goodness, how sad is that? And I thought, how can something be so sad and put to music? So shortly after that, I saw B.B. King. And, you know, when you were a kid, you don't really explore your emotions, you know, you sort of grow into them. And I was starting to develop empathy and realizing that there's sorrow in the world and there's sadness. And, you know, I was very innocent as a kid and very protected, as parents do with their kids. I saw B.B. King, and he came out and he sang, I bought you a $10 dinner and you said it was just a snack. I bought you a brand new Ford and you said, and he puts his hand on his hip, I want a Cadillac. You know, he imitates them. I took you to my penthouse and you said it was just a shack. I gave you 7 children and now you want to give them back. How blue can you get? And I realized, I thought, that's funny. That's actually funny. And I sort of put those things together and I realized that blues is this expression. It's a way of actually telling the sad story and in a way kind of sending yourself up, laughing about it and getting it out there, you know, because I saw my father was the most amazing man. Man, I respect that man to this day. I love him. I wish, one of my great regrets is that I never told him how much I respected him and loved him. But he obviously had post-traumatic stress from the Second World War, you know, and sometimes when he never talked about the war ever. But there were a couple of times when he'd had a few drinks, when he just mentioned some things, and I thought, my goodness, this man's seen horrible things, you know. And I saw what it did to him to bottle all that up. And as a young teenager, I sort of was, you know, very interested in psychology. I used to do voluntary work in a psych ward in my late teens, actually, as I wanted to really get behind understanding mental illness and that sort of thing. And but I realized the kind of enormous commitment I would need to make to that if I wanted to go down that road as a career path. But I started to understand that blues and all these expressions were like ways of getting those deep things that cause us pain out out there, wherever that is.
Expressing yourself.
Yeah. And even playing a guitar solo is it's like weeping in a way. It's like that, you know, and that's why I love jazz, because it allows for those spontaneous expressions of emotion.
Look, it's probably something I've never experienced doing it. I used to watch my grandfather.
But you were listening.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, there's you know, that's why it always fascinates me with people's wedding songs, funeral songs, those sorts of things, because people trying to express especially the people who pick their own music, especially for funerals, I find fascinating, because often the family's got to try and figure it out. But you can really see when someone picks their own music, because you can see how close it is to them. And, you know, I watch some people get transformed by it, and it just really especially the people who really enjoy what they do. You see people who are in the music industry who are just doing it to tick a box and getting paid and those sorts of things, and the care isn't quite there. But like we were talking about earlier, how the music industry's changed now. I think there's a lot more love almost playing now because the money's not as good as it was, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I'll tell you a little story if you don't mind. Yeah. I was playing a piano bar. It was really heavy going. It was a really great little bar in Zurich. And a guy used to come in every night, and I used to call him, under my breath, I used to call him Mr. Big Bucks. He'd always, he would smoke a $150 cigar and drink these $1,000 shots of whiskey and aged whiskey and whatever. He was obviously very wealthy. And he used to buy me a drink, whatever I wanted, and he'd tip me hundreds of pounds to sing a song, And he, every night, it really bugged me. Every night he asked me to sing White a Shade of Pale. And I got a bit of an attitude about it. I thought, oh, no, not that song again, And one night he came to me and he said, you know why I asked you to sing that song every night, don't you? And I said, no. And he said, I used to own a bunch of clubs here in town, in Zurich. And my wife used to come along. And at the end of the night, I would always stop what I was doing and dance with her. And he said one night we went onto the dance floor and we asked the band to play White a Shade of Pale. And I danced with her and she dropped dead in my arms. She had some sort of tumour. And he had tears in his eyes, so I know he wasn't making it up. And I thought, I'm never going to get a bad attitude about a song ever again. I was telling Jack this a while ago. When I came back to Australia, I was playing great gigs in Europe. I came back to Australia and I'm playing in the pubs again, seemingly at the bottom of the ladder and, just doing covers. And I went through this thing where I thought, I'm just a covers musician and, feeling like, And my son one day said to me, hey, Dad, there's people that would kill to do what you're doing, And I started to adjust my attitude about it. I thought, I'm not going to call myself a covers musician anymore. I'm going to call myself an interpreter of songs, And my then wife used to say, how was the gig? And I'd come home and I'd say, oh, no, I had to sing Brown Eyed Girl again. And she said, yeah, but it's your Brown Eyed Girl. You sing it the way you put your heart into that song. Make it your song. And I realized, I thought, well, there is dignity in being a covers musician. It's not, I don't have to, I'm going to value myself and the impact I have on people. I'm going to value that. And that attitude makes a way. Does that make sense?
Because like you're talking about the fellow whose wife passed.
Yeah.
You don't know what's happening on that soul's heads. It's just that there. Everything is moments.
Yeah.
From the moment you get out of bed to the moment you go back to bed.
Yeah.
So you don't know who you're influencing, who you're affecting, and for something you were doing was very powerful for a man who just wanted to keep the memory going. Yeah. So I think
and I had this wrong attitude, oh no, not that song again, and I thought that was really wrong with me. I've got to adjust that. And I remember my son also told me about he'd watched a video about the guy that played the Brady Bunch and how he went through a sort of a depression about that. I wish I'd been a great actor on the screen or a Broadway success. And he was talking in a school to acting students, and they were in awe at Mr. Brady. And he realized these kids that are coming out of acting school, they would kill to be Mr. Brady, to get a gig like that, And he realized, well, I am a successful actor because I have to draw upon those skills to play Mr. Brady. Just because it's a kid's show, I am a successful actor. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
It's an attitude about things. I think that's what I'd encourage young musicians about, is don't think I'm just playing on a corner pub on a Friday night and it's just a buck, paycheck. Put your heart and soul into it because, it means something. It means something to people. Absolutely. It means something to you that you're doing something that you love that is bringing you income.
So we touched on the mental health stuff very briefly before, but I'd be very curious to see what your opinion on it is, because obviously the world thrives on it a little bit at the moment, just with everyone's different take and people leaping around. One of the notes you've got here is that love is an anchor for mental health. Can you expand on that for me?
Well, yeah. It's a big issue, and it's close to my heart too, because I've been in despair. I remember not so long ago being in physical agony, emotional distress, and mental torment, and I've been there. I've been there presently, and I live in a really high level of peace and joy in my life right now. Circumstantially, things haven't really changed much. I think it's got a lot to do with your philosophical framework of belief. One of the things that led to my dark tunnel was the unrealistic expectations that I placed upon myself.
Yep.
And forgiving myself was a really big step in coming into a healthy mental state. I don't take any medications. I don't do drugs. I smoked a bit of pot when I was a kid, but cocaine was all around me when I was a kid, and when I was in bands.
Peruvian marching powder.
Yeah. And cocaine was basically currency in the recording studios when we were doing albums back in the day. It was everywhere. And I was navigated away from those things. I knew within myself that it wasn't a good path for me to go down. I remember going to my mum once when I was probably 15, 16, and she was very worried about me getting involved with drugs because we weren't far from Nimbin, which is the drug centre of the hedonistic 70s, and 80s. And I remember going to her one day, and I'd been listening to one of my favourite albums. It was an album that Charles Mingus played on it. It was what we call collective improvisation. It's just this spontaneous improvisational pieces of music. And I remember feeling so elated listening to that music. And I went to my mum and I said, "Mum, I don't want you to worry about me doing drugs. I have my music. It just gives me such a good feeling to listen and experience music." I'm getting a little off the track.
No.
But love, the anchor of the soul. I believe that to me, God is an objective reality, not a subjective experience. So I don't need tingles up and down my spine to feel good about myself. I'm satisfied in my intellect of the reality of God. So I see God's intervention in my life as a direct intervention, a direct help to me. To me, knowing that I'm loved and that I have the capability of loving others and putting them first rather than myself first, because that's what God did for me. That somehow takes me out of my mental torment. It somehow takes me out of myself and puts me into the light of love, if that makes sense.
You talk about your dark times and music. Do you feel that music was one of the things that actually pulled you out of the dark times?
Oh, yeah. John Coltrane, very complex individual. He believed that music was like prayer. It was like a hymn, it was like poetry. And because he saw the profound effect that music had on people in his performances. And so music, it's very cathartic. To me, I could be playing in the local pub, singing all those songs, but to me, it's like I'm worshiping God. I'm functioning out of the gift that I've been given, and it's a gift that I'm giving to other people. I'm giving pleasure to other people, and that takes me out of my own prison, and releases me into that warmth of love, because that's love. That's love. Love isn't some airy fairy, violins playing in the background. It's action.
Yeah. And look,
does that make sense?
Yeah, look, it's funny because I actually, one thing about I talk about my grandparents a bit when it comes to music and religion. Both were big Church of England family. So my grandmother was very amusing, and I didn't really understand until I watched it one day. We had the Jehovah's Witnesses come to the door. There was 2 or 3 of them, and I'd grown up on that whole, you found a way to shut the door and turn up the music. So wait. My grandmother said, look, we'd love to have a cup of tea and come and talk to you.
Yeah.
And my grandmother went, well, that's okay. I'd love to have a cup of tea with you. But your bag sits there. My religion sits there. We're going to sit at my table and have a conversation, but our religions stay there. And it was really fascinating how she was able to bring people in and out, but keep it there. And it was almost a professional conversation because she was able to go, that's lovely, but the bag stays there.
Yeah, it's funny. I speak pretty openly about my faith when I'm asked about it, but I don't want to push it on people in a way that makes them uncomfortable.
Which is, I think, a lot of the world struggles with that, with everything. I think that if we were all just a smidge more considerate to what the other person's willing to hear and receive, we'd actually all go a long way.
I think that, those dark times. I mean, I could talk about this for hours. But
would you be comfortable sharing what some of your dark times were?
Sure. I might get a bit emotional. Losing people you love, that's the hardest thing, and those things, I think that's the deepest wound, is the wound of rejection. When someone turns on you and rejects you. And I think that's probably, those are the hardest things to face. People you love.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're talking about the loss was
any kind of loss.
Yeah.
Whether it's people dying or whether it's people losing children or, especially losing children. That's probably the hardest thing I ever faced. And my children didn't die, but I lost them. And it nearly destroyed me. I was physically ill for years. I nearly died, literally nearly died. And I was in church one day, and I'm not saying God spoke to me, but it was as though God had spoken to me. And I was praying and I was worshiping God, and I had this impression inside myself. The word unforgiveness came into my mind, and I've practiced forgiveness all my life. I've always forgiven people as a conscious decision of my will, because I believe forgiveness is a decision.
Yep.
And I thought, no, there's no one that I haven't forgiven. Everyone is forgiven in my books. And it was like a voice in my head, what about yourself? And I started to weep. And I realized that I was holding this unrealistic expectation of myself, that I had to be this perfect father, or I had to be this perfect man, and somehow I'd failed that, even though I'd tried my best. And it was a real, can I use the word revelation?
Yep.
And from that point on, things started improving. Even my physical health, because I was getting up in the morning, I had pain from my body. I could barely get out of bed. All I could do was wake up in the morning, throw my legs over the end of the bed and try to stand up. I was that broken and depressed. And I would drag myself along to a gig, do my gig, and then go home and fall into bed. And it was emotional. It was affecting my physical health. But from that point on, things started to get better. And I made some changes. I made a lot of changes to my, when I was in Europe, as part of my contract playing piano, these luxury hotels would accommodate me and feed me in their restaurants. So I was in food heaven for years, eating in these luxury hotels, the finest food and whatever wine I wanted. And, I paid a price for that. I came back to Australia and I was way, way overweight. I could barely walk up a set of stairs. And I made changes, some really radical changes, to the point where my friends think I'm a complete health fanatic now. But I'm very careful what I eat. I'm very careful about what I put into myself. I'm a big fan of natural medicine. I'm not against allopathic medical practitioners, but I think that naturopathy is so valuable and scientifically verifiable. I had a gangrenous foot a few years ago. I had 3 surgeons, wanted to cut it off, and the doctor gave me an antibiotic. And I'm not against antibiotics. I'd recently had an antibiotic with an ear infection that I had, so they're life-saving sometimes. But I knew that particular antibiotic was not going to help the gangrene in my foot. And I went to the doctor and I said, "You know this is useless, don't you?" Because I had osteomyelitis. And there's an old saying that the show must go on because the bills go on. I went to a gig with a gangrenous foot, up in agony, and I did a gig. That's my commitment to my music. I played with sprained ankles, and I handed the antibiotic back to the doctor. And I said, "You know this is useless, don't you?" And he said, "Yeah, I know that. It's not going to touch your osteomyelitis. It's not going to help the gangrene." I said, "Well, what did you give it to me for?" And he said, "Well, I had to give you something." So at that point, I turned to natural medicines and with natural antibiotics. And I'm not giving medical advice here, so I don't want any of your listeners to sue me. But with natural medicine, I saved my foot. 3 surgeons wanted to cut it off. One of them got right up in my face. They said, "If you were my brother," he said, "I can't force you, but if you're my brother, this foot would be coming off right now." So with natural medicine, I saved my foot. How did I get onto natural medicine? Keeping myself healthy. Yeah, keeping.
Nothing wrong with deviating.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of looking after the physical body. At my age, goodness,
So how old are you, if you don't?
63.
63.
Yeah, 63. And there's guys half my age that can't do what I do in my music. And I'm not saying that as a boast, because 4 or 5 years ago, I couldn't either. So I've been looking after myself. And I think mental health also will improve with good diet.
Yeah.
I really do believe there's a connection there as well.
And it probably brings us on to, we're talking about the industry, working in the industry, being a professional, trying to keep yourself relevant. You talked before about working with the sprained ankles, working with the infected foot, even with probably some of the dark times.
Yeah.
What level of importance do you place on your professionalism to be able to perform when everything here is probably swirling a bit, but the bills still have to be paid?
That's right. The bills have to be paid. And that's the attitude I've taken to my career in music. It's like, no, because I think, when you look at the great albums that came out of the 70s and whatever, the people in those days, they were totally committed to their music, They would sleep in their combi vans, to write good songs. And I'm not saying you have to be poor to be a musician, but there are a lot of musicians these days that don't have that commitment. They want to go on the television, have the 15-minute performance and have everything handed to them on a silver plate, So I think that kind of attitude of commitment's important. What was the question again?
Actually, no, we were talking about professionalism. And
that attitude, that work ethic is really important. Yeah, just pressing on and having that.
Do you find keeping that level of professionalism with even the stuff going on in your life has made it simpler for you to get gigs, and
yes,
because they know you're going to turn up, they know you're going to do the job,
yes,
and they're not going to have to think about it.
That's right.
Which I find is a struggle in some, not probably our younger ones, but there's a bit of generational stuff where they think giving you a 5 out of 10 is going to be fine. When if you're not delivering that 8.
Yeah, someone recently said to me, "Oh, Simon, you should be making your agent work for you. You're paying them a commission." I said, no. I want to make it as easy as possible for my agent. I don't want them to work hard for me. I want them to work as little as possible, and I want to make it easy for them, because if it's easy for them, guess who they're going to book? because I'm not the pain in the ass. They know that if they send me an email, I'm going to reply straight away. I'm going to turn up sober. I'm going to do the gig. You know, I'm going to, and yes, I think that attitude is you know, a lot of young musicians say to me, how can I be a great musician? And I say, well, do a short course on business.
Consistency.
Yeah, because if you've got the money rolling, if you've got the business rolling, in my dad's generation, if you're a musician, you referred to your career as show business, emphasis on the word business, and because I think that to be a great musician, you need time, and you can't have time if you've got bills to pay and you're stressing about the bills. If you've got that cash flow going, and you think of your music as a career, and you have the attitude. That business acumen, that attitude to what you do, your marketing, you do your maintenance, you do your work, the money flows, then lo and behold, you've got a few days a week to sit behind your instrument and work and develop your repertoire.
We're moving into reflections in the hard way. So, if you could go back and talk to your 18-year-old self and tell them something that you would now that you wish you could go back and tell them, what would it be?
Don't let the pain of life dictate to you what you can and can't do. And don't let, you know, I listened. I think it's really important to listen to your mentors, listen to people with wisdom, but it's also important to shut off those voices that speak negatively to you. I mean, when I was young, I would have an idea and someone would say, no, that's not a good idea. And I would believe it. I would accept the dictates of negativity somehow, and I would put restrictions on what I thought I was capable of doing. When I look back on my career, there is so much more I could have achieved had I just simply stuck to my guns and stayed with what I was good at and kept at it consistently.
Do you have someone you'd call your biggest fan?
In music?
Life, music?
It's really hard to say because I have a lot of influences in music from different styles and different genres. Goodness, that's a hard question. There's so many. It's like saying if you've got a favourite song. You know, I might be able to narrow it down to a favourite country, a favourite blues or whatever. But well,
that's actually not a bad thing. If your biggest fan looked like that, it's not that. So then it's such a base to come from.
Yeah. If you ask me my favourite guitarist, probably Andre Segovia influenced me so much because...
your dad's talked about him.
Yeah. Paco de Lucia. He was a flamenco giant, monster guitarist. Chick Corea and Herbie Hancock, of course, were great influences in my piano upbringing, and it's just too hard to even begin to, narrow them down.
It sounds like it's almost a whole other conversation in talking.
Dave Brubeck, Miles Davis, Eric Clapton. A lot of the
saddest stories you'll probably hear. His music motivation.
Yeah.
I never knew it until one day I happened to a music friend of mine told me, because do you know my name? And I never knew, I never really understood what the sad song was about. And he actually played me the news article on YouTube and I just about fell over. Just probably one of the greatest songs that probably written of, probably the last.
He never intended to release it.
No.
He wrote that song, as we were talking about before about venting, he wrote it as like a prayer.
Yeah.
Would you know my name if I saw you in heaven, when his son died? And he just poured it out, and he played it to some friends over dinner or something, and they said, you have to release this song. I was playing on Hayman Island one summer many, many years ago, and a memo came out from the general manager. There's a whole group of musicians working on the island. I was doing New Year's Eve there and a whole lot of events, and no one on the island was allowed to play Tears in Heaven.
All right.
No, for 1 week. A memo from the general manager. No one plays that song. Evidently a woman was coming onto the island, a very wealthy woman.
Yep.
She paid for a week on Hayman Island, and she just buried her husband. And they sang that song at the funeral. and she didn't want anyone. Or the playlist, I had to check the playlist. So that song didn't appear on any of the playlists.
Oh, fascinating.
It was just too much.
Grief and emotion are very strange things.
It was just too much for her to listen to that song. Yeah.
So we're talking about the hard lessons in life and those sorts of things. You've given me a lot. If you had to pick a lesson you learnt, which you would think you learned the hard way, what do you think it would be?
Boy, that's a hard question. Yeah, goodness. There's so many lessons I've learned. But I was saying before about not letting those dark times dictate to you, you know, like, because you start to have this internal monologue. I'm no good. I can't do it. Others can, but I can't. So those are the things that I wish I'd learned to shut off in my early years, and getting back to my faith in God, which I can't have to answer honestly, and it's an integral part of the way that I've coped with the difficult times, is looking to God through Jesus. You know, we've just had Easter, and what Jesus did on the cross is just when I look at that, you know, the length that God went to show love for humanity, then I'm sorry if people are offended if I'm talking about my religious beliefs.
You're at the right table, as even as you can get.
Yeah, but that's the framework that I process grief and sorrow in. I take it to the cross. I take it to that place where that transaction happens between man and God. You know.
Look, it's life lessons come in all shapes and fears, and it's amazing what I've learned from people over the years. And you're just talking about taking offence. That's one of the things I've tried to teach to my children and my family, that if we take offence to everything, it's going to eat you in here, because in the end you can't find that joy and happiness.
Yeah, I was telling a joke at a gig recently, and I said, I hope I'm offending someone. I think we need to go back and start offending each other more, you know, because that's what a free society is about. It's not about deliberately insulting someone, no, but you don't need a law to control that. If I go into a pub and I insult someone, I don't need a law, because something else is going to hit me in the side of the face. Yeah, you know,
it might be about 7 ounces when it gets.
Yeah, and it's the social restraints that control that sort of behaviour. It's the fear of rejection. I don't want to go out into public and be offensive to someone in an insulting way, but in a free and open society, open discussion about issues and disagreeing. That's what I like about what I liked about living in Greece and parts of Europe, particularly the men. They get really heated with each other. They argue back and forth, but at the end of that, they go and have a beer, and it's just they're not offended if they disagree with each other, and they'll argue in a kind of devil's advocate way, in a kind of adversarial thinking kind of manner, because that's what you've got to do to get to the bolts, to the nuts and bolts of something. And I think we're Australians, we have to get past that.
Absolutely.
I think we've got to get past that thing where you're offended because you vote for a particular party or whatever. Come on, let's talk about the issues.
In the big scheme of things.
And not be, pissed off with each other because we disagree.
Look, in the big scheme of things, it doesn't matter.
No.
We all go in the ground the same way. So speaking of the same way, you now have a question to read out.
Oh, okay.
And you get to answer it.
Oh, okay.
And after you've answered it, you get to write your own question in.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what it is. This is from Kat, my last guest. If you're from around here, chances are you've worn something that we've embroidered, printed, pressed, or branded. Whatever it is, we just get it done. So if you need something, drop in and see us.
No, I have to answer this question.
Yeah, you have to read it out. Then you have to answer.
Can I say her name?
You can.
Kat Lynn. What was your sliding door moment? Oh, wow. I've had so many of them. When I was in London, I went to London. After my first divorce, I was really, really busted up. Really, really busted up. And I woke up one morning. I'm not ashamed to say this. I was so broke. I was living in my sister's garden shed. I was so broke. And I couldn't get out of bed in the morning. I was so depressed, so broken from losing my family. And I woke up one morning. I thought, no, I'm not going to let this beat me. This is it. I've grieved enough. I've been in sorrow for long enough. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to make something of my life, you know. And I flew to London, and that's another story, how I got the money to do that. And I emailed ahead and tried to set up work in London. And when I arrived, I had to do dog jobs, as we say. I was cleaning toilets and whatever, just to make things, you know, because the agent had messed up my schedule, and I didn't get direct straight away into work. But it wasn't long after that I was playing piano in the fine hotels in London, and it just. But I ended up in a conference in the exhibition centre in London, and I met all the hoteliers from international hotels all over the world. They were having a conference, and I thought, here I am pouring coffee, you know, for these people. And I got talking to them, and one of the sales reps said, Simon, you're a great conversation guy. You know, what are you doing here pouring coffee? What do you really do? And I said, I play piano. And they said, oh, well, we've just taken over the management contract for a hotel in Fuerteventura in the Spanish Canary Islands. And I thought, where the heck is that? We're looking for a piano player. Have you got a demo? And I said, yeah, sure. So here I'm in London, cleaning toilets, busted, broke, newly married, and can barely make enough money to pay the rent and buy money for the tube. And shortly after that, next thing I know, I'm lying in a hammock in the Spanish Canary Islands, living in this apartment provided by the hotel, free of charge, playing piano 3 nights a week in this palace, free food, and it was just a stepping stone. And I met some people who had a hotel in Germany, in Hamburg, that one of the same hotels, the Atlantic Kempinski Hotel. They had a hotel in Hamburg, and I got a contract there, and then I got a contact in Zurich, and
away you went.
Yeah, and there I was in London, busted broke, thinking, man, how am I going to ever get out of this poverty with my new wife? Am I stuck here forever? And it was just amazing. And I remember.
And it was as simple as pouring a cup of coffee for someone.
Yeah.
And away you went.
Yeah. And just having the guts to step out.
Yep.
I didn't even know where Fuerteventura was.
Yep.
I didn't even know where it was. Next thing I'm on a plane, you know, to this Spanish Canary Islands, you know. It took I'm not saying this boastfully, but it took guts.
No, to get to talk to anyone, even a stranger like that.
Yeah.
Look, unfortunately, I've never been to the Canary Islands. If someone wants me to go play piano there, it won't be very good, but I'll go.
It took a little bit of organising. I had to do a lot of emailing, a lot of marketing, but I've taken that marketing model, and I've helped other people, young guys, with their businesses. I've helped a lot of people start their businesses. In fact, if we've got time, I'll tell you a little story. I've got a young guy. I met him when I was in the Spanish Canary Islands, a 21-year-old kid playing in a band just around the corner, in a bar, 6 nights a week. Great young guitar player, singer, half Indian, half Irish. And he grew up in Manchester. He was mercilessly teased and bullied when he was a kid. And he was getting a bit of that, you know, in the club. And he used to lean on me a bit, like a 21-year-old kid. I took him under my wing a little bit, you know, and he looked to me a little bit like a father figure, you know. Sometimes he'd bring me up and he'd say, oh, can you come round? Can you come round and listen to the band for a while? I knew why, because he was getting ribbed, he was getting hassled by the other musicians. And I just went around there and I made sure that he wasn't picked on.
Yep.
You know, I just made sure, you know, this is my boy, you don't touch my boy, you know. I tell him to this day, I say, I love you like a son, you know, I've adopted him, you know. And he wanted to go out on the cruise ship, so I encouraged him to do that. And I said, don't be silly like I was when I was a kid, save your money. So he went away for 8 months, worked on the ship, met his wife, fell in love. And when he got back, he said, what am I going to do with my money? And I said, buy an apartment. He bought an apartment in Cork in Ireland. Bought an apartment. What'll I do now? I said, go away again, do another contract, rent the place out, put all the money that you get from the rental income into the property, all the money from your gig back in. Anyway, you know the story. 3 years later, he's got got a house of his own.
Yep.
Admittedly, not a.
It's still a home.
It's a home. 3 years later, he's got 2 apartments, a house in Spain that he rents out on Airbnb. And he practically lives off the income from his investments. And I said, now, as a 34-year-old guy, you can go and do whatever gigs you want now. You know, and I said, I was 50 then. And I said, look at me, I'm 50, and I've got to go out and play 6 nights a week to pay my bills because I neglected. I was a young hippie. You know, when I was a kid, it was cool not to own stuff.
Yeah.
It was cool to walk around bare feet and not to be a capitalist and own a house, you know. And you know, when you get to 40 and 50, you realise that when you've got kids and that sort of thing, that you've got to have a roof over your head, you know. And it's very gratifying that he took my advice and that he has been benefited from my mistakes. And nothing more gratifying than being able to share. And I hope that by sharing today, someone's been encouraged to have the wisdom to do something to avoid the mistakes that I made when I was young.
Well, that's the whole reason I'm doing this. If you help one person, it's a win.
Yeah.
So now you get to write your question in the book.
For the next person.
For the next person. We don't need to know what it is. You've just got to write your name and write the question.
Is the question to provoke any particular line of thought, or?
No, it is if you had to sit and ask someone a question, you want to get a response from them. That'll do.
Now that's a big one.
That's a big one.
It's going to spin some heads, man.
That's all right. Perfectly fine. So, we are.
In fact, I probably shouldn't have asked that question because it's going to open a huge debate.
That's the question you've written. That's the one we're going to run with. So that's wrapping us up. No,
Thanks for having me up.
No, it's been fantastic. Look, thank you for being so open and getting a bit vulnerable. If you're looking for Simon, if you look for him on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, just look up Simon York Music.
Yeah, I have recently taken down my website. It's a long story. I'm getting it back up again. I'm quite frankly, I'm a little bit untidy online at the moment.
It's okay. My wife was looking through your music, and as you said, you seem like someone she'd like to put on a stage.
Oh, cool.
So your socials are doing their job.
Oh, okay.
Ladies and gents, thank you for tuning in. If you're trying to find us the hard way, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, very easy done. Puff and Matt, thank you for being on the hard way. Thank you for being on the hard way.
Good to be here. Thank you.